This is Land of Havilah, Leviticus 20. Yahweh knows that when Israel takes up residence in the Promised Land, the surrounding nations will influence them. Therefore, regarding the local god Molech, to whom they sacrifice their children, verse 1, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Moreover, ye shall tell the children of Israel, any one of the children of Israel or of the strangers who live as foreigners in Israel, who gives any of his offspring to Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I also will set my face against that person, and will cut him off from among his people, because he's given of his offspring to Molech, to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. If the people of the land all hide their eyes from that person, when he gives of his offspring to Molech, and don't put him to death, then I'll set my face against that man and against his family, and will cut him off, and all who play the prostitute after him to play the prostitute with Molech, from among their people. Comment in verse 2, the penalty for sacrificing children to Molech shall be death by stoning. In verse 3, Yahweh will cut off the perpetrator from his people. He didn't explain it any further, but it has a ring of finality to it, as if he'll cut them off eternally. It was said of the patriarchs and many Israelites in the Old Testament that when they passed away, they, quote, were gathered to their people, or they, quote, slept with their fathers, end quote. But not if Yahweh cuts them off from his people. They'll have separate sleeping arrangements. David said, Surely I'll dwell in Yahweh's house forever, Psalm 23:6. But again, not so for anyone that Yahweh cuts off. In verse 4, regarding the person who sacrifices his children to Molech, Yahweh is aware that the community might, quote, hide their eyes from that person, end quote, or, as we might put it, the community will look the other way. They'll fail to perform a stoning. In such a case, Yahweh says he'll personally set his face against that person and his family for sacrificing children. So were the foreign gods real or figments of man's imagination? Deuteronomy 4:28 speaks of other gods as, quote, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell, end quote. But though they constructed them of earthly materials, Deuteronomy 32:17 says there was something there, that when Israel sacrificed to foreign gods, quote, they sacrificed to demons that were no gods, end quote. Psalm 106:37 agrees, quote, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the demons, end quote. So the Canaanite gods weren't what the people thought they were, but there was a demonic reality behind them. Genesis 3 introduced us to the forces of darkness when the serpent came into the Garden of Eden and sabotaged man's relationship to God. Ephesians 6:12 is perhaps the most revealing single verse, quote, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, end quote. But it's really not much of a wrestling match between us and the forces of darkness if we stick with the Lord, quote. We're more than conquerors through him who loved us, Romans 8:37. And James 4:7, quote, submit therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you, end quote. Verse 6, the person that turns to those who are mediums and to the wizards to play the prostitute after them, I will even set my face against that person and will cut him off from among his people. Sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am Yahweh your God. Comment, occultic practices are unholy. Yahweh compares it to prostitution. We should be faithful to our rightful partner, which is, in the spiritual sense, God. We shouldn't cavort with whatever mysterious forces are behind occultic practices. Verse 8, you shall keep my statutes and do them. I am Yahweh who sanctifies you. For everyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He's cursed his father or his mother. His blood shall be upon him. The man who commits adultery with another man's wife, even he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. Comment, the lawful penalty for cursing one's father or mother was death in verse 9 and death for adultery in verse 10. In the coming history of Israel, throughout their stay in the Promised Land, we won't be reading much about enforcement of the death penalty, probably because abominable practices became so accepted that to oppose them would be to face societal backlash. And everyone felt guilty at some level, knowing they had violated the law of Moses on some point. Therefore, they naturally refused to enforce the law unless they were total hypocrites. Jesus realized this when they brought a woman to him caught in adultery. The penalty for it was supposed to be death, as verse 10 just said, but Jesus invited whoever it was without sin to cast the first stone at the woman. But each person in the crowd knew he was guilty of something and not qualified to stone her, so they all walked away. So there was a big gap between the requirements of the law and the enforcement of it, and rightfully so, because everyone was guilty. To fulfill the law, they'd have to stone each other into oblivion. So what good was the law then? It was just good, period. And for us, it's, quote, our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we may be justified by faith. Galatians 3:24. Now for sexual crimes, each of them calling for the death penalty, verse 11. The man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They've committed a perversion. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man takes a wife and her mother, it's wickedness. They shall be burned with fire, both he and they, that there may be no wickedness among you. If a man lies with an animal, he shall surely be put to death, and you shall kill the animal. If a woman approaches any animal and lies with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man takes his sister, his father's daughter or his mother's daughter, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it's a shameful thing. They shall be cut off in the sight of the children of their people. He's uncovered his sister's nakedness. He shall bear his iniquity. Comment now for sexual crimes that don't call for the death penalty, verse 18. If a man lies with a woman having her monthly period and uncovers her nakedness, he's made naked her fountain, and she's uncovered the fountain of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from among their people. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, nor of your father's sister, for he's made his close relative naked. They shall bear their iniquity. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he's uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. If a man takes his brother's wife, it's an impurity. He's uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. Comment verses 20 and 21. If a man lies with his uncle's or brother's wife, the adulterous couple shall die childless. In other words, they'll forfeit custody of their children for lifetime. Verse 22. You shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my ordinances and do them, that the land where I am bringing you to dwell may not vomit you out. You shall not walk in the customs of the nation which I am casting out before you, for they did all these things, and therefore I abhorred them. But I've said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I'll give it to you to possess it, a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm Yahweh your God, who separated you from the peoples. Comment, this is also so that the land won't vomit the Israelites out in verse 22. But by the way, it eventually did. Yahweh used the same expression in chapter 18, that the land would vomit them out. Such practices make a nation so weak that they won't be willing and able to keep possession of their land. They won't be strong enough or willing to defend it. In verses 23 and 24, Yahweh abhors the Canaanites for their abominable practices. So he'll remove them from their land and give it to Israel. He'll keep Israel physically separate from them, and Israel shall do their part in separating themselves by keeping Yahweh's laws and customs. Verse 25. You shall therefore make a distinction between the clean animal and the unclean, and between the unclean fowl and the clean, and you shall not make yourselves abominable by animal or by bird or by anything with which the ground teems, which I've separated from you as unclean for you. You shall be holy to me, for I, Yahweh, am holy, and have set you apart from the peoples, that you should be mine. Comment now touching for the third time in 2 chapters on the topic of the occult, verse 27. A man or a woman that is a medium or is a wizard shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones. Their blood shall be upon them. Comment, in other words, when you stone a medium or a wizard, you won't be guilty of their blood. It's on them. Leviticus 21 is next at landofhavilah.net.